everybody. It's me, Carmine DeStefano, the Bookman. Now that I've seen Avengers Age of Ultron, not Avengers 2 Age of Ultron or Avengers The Age of Ultron, now that I've seen the movie after showing you everything we know already, I'm going to give you my review. And before I really get into the review, I want to give you the two things. I'm not going to give you any spoilers, but the two things, really there were most likely 3 and possibly 4, but 2 things that I can say based on what we've seen in the trailers more or less, that I had a problem with. There are at least 2 things I can come up with that's wrong with that title. And the 2 things that I'm going to just get right off the bat, right away, before I get into how I felt now that I've seen the movie. The 2 problems I had were, yes, in case you're wondering, that was not a dream sequence. They did sort of attempt to have a romance between Black Widow and the Hulk, otherwise known as Natasha Romanoff and Bruce Banner. That was one problem I had. And the other one I had was one of the reasons why they couldn't go that route, because most of us comic book buffs know the truth in the comic book, was because they gave Clint Barton, otherwise known as Hawkeye, a family. So those were 2 things I had an issue with, because in the comic book, Black Widow and Hawkeye, they're an item. That's one of the reasons why they do fight in the Avengers. In the original Avengers, that's one of the reasons why Natasha's in the Avengers anyway. In the original Avengers movie, the first Avengers movie, it seemed as though they were going that route, with Loki even saying, "Is this love I hear, Agent Romanoff?" And she's like, "Love is for children, I owe him a debt." And granted, people would say, see, that means she owes him a debt, and that's the only reason why she is so loyal to him. But they did have sort of a chemistry that they were developing that made it obvious that they were together. And in this movie, right away, it sort of becomes that, like, Romanoff was Bruce Banner's calming factor. Now, I understand that they didn't really have any kind of Hulk movies. They did have The Incredible Hulk, where Betty Ross was his chick, as she is in the comic books, before she became the Harpy, Queen of the Harpies. But they already had a movie, I think, that was supposed to be a Hulk movie before the Avengers, in the Avengers universe, where he was madly in love with Betty, but couldn't do anything. So now it's like he's hanging with Natasha. I mean, it was weird. Like, and the reason why I have a problem with it is because it seems like such a thrown-in subplot. Like, I really didn't see any purpose to it. There really, if you looked at it, there wasn't any purpose to it. Just like there wasn't any purpose to Hawkeye suddenly having a family and being out in a farm somewhere. Like, none of that stuff really was in the comic, and it seemed so tossed in there. But upon saying all of that, and the 2 things, like I said, the 2 other problems that I had, one of them was a major issue I had that I can't get into without giving anything away. And the other one is sort of a major issue I might have if they're going to go that route. So if you've seen the movie, you might know what I'm talking about. I ask you not to give away any spoilers, but the movie itself was fucking phenomenal. It was really just such a great movie. And to have Ultron, I mean, it's a great movie in the sense that it's a pre-summer blockbuster action superhero. It gives you superheroes doing what superheroes are supposed to do, and supervillains doing what supervillains are supposed to do. And the creation of Ultron itself, as well as another character that we've seen a glimpse of, but I'm not going to get into exactly who it is. If you're a comic book fan and you've already seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. If you're not really a comic book fan and you want to see the movie, I'm not going to say anything about it. Ultron's origins were pretty much this, like I said in the previous video, everything that we know. Ultron was originally created by Hank Pym. In this case, it was created by Bruce Banner and Tony Stark, with Tony Stark being the one spearheading the campaign. And it revolves around the spear that he had, or the scepter, if you will, that Loki brought into the first Avengers. It sort of ties all that stuff in. And if you've seen the post-credit scene that introduced the twins being in this one, and that's another thing I don't want to really harp on it. The twins, Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch, were not lab experiments. They were mutants. Now, I understand that you don't want to do the mutant thing because you do it with the X-Men, but really they were mutants, and they were the children of Magneto. So I get that you're making them like, prisoners of war or victims of war in Croatia. That's where they were originally. That's where they're from originally. that had their homes blown up and were orphaned and, whatever. But, again, I overlook that. I put that to the side. That's not really a major issue that I had. But be that as it may, the movie itself was a thrill ride. It really starts off with an explosion. There's another explosion in the creation of Ultron itself. And what I really loved about this movie was it really showed how and why Ultron was such a threat. And how it was so imposing on the Avengers throughout the entire course of, 30, 40 years since it's been incepted. This thing was a menace and a half. This thing was a god-awful threat, just a destructive force. And its overall plan was brilliant. The whole thing was really brilliant. Now, I do have to say that it was written differently. I mean, Ultron is the living automaton. He's a drone. He's a droid. Has no emotion. And that's one of the things that makes him so frightening. But in this, what should have been something that I had a problem with, I really ended up enjoying, and that was the way they made him a little bit more, I don't want to say emotional, but a little bit more personable, if I may say, almost humanistic. But the thing about it is, because the way they made Ultron was, it was so displaced from human emotion, all those emotions, it was so displaced from that, like I don't want to get really too deep into it, but there's a scene where he removes a guy's arm and he goes, oh yeah, that looks like it's going to hurt. Well, I'm sure we can fix them. like there's all these things. It was so obvious that this thing had no care of the human species. It just wanted to get rid of human beings as a whole. And trying to relate to humans or be a little bit more approachable to certain humans that he wanted to utilize in his plan, it's just so obvious that it had no clue how to do that. Which made it even more frightening. I do have to say, in this movie, in the first movie, there was so much energy to it. It was almost like a carnival. Like it was almost like an amusement park. Whereas this one had a lot more of an insidious motif. It was I don't want to say disturbing, but it was sort of frightening, especially when Ultron's program first gets its sentient intelligence. It's such a real frightening thing. It really gives you this like weird vibe. There's a lot of darkness to it. There's a dark presence to it. It's a lot more chilling than the first Avengers movie, which I also saw in the movie theater, as you might have known. But this one was a lot more, it was colorful, but it was not like the first Avengers colorful. There was a lot more of a noir type aspect to it that made it somewhat, chilling, but in a good way, And of course, David Spader as Ultron originally, or David Spade, I keep forgetting which one it was, I think it's Spader. Originally, when I first heard his voiceover as Ultron, I was kind of like, and I mean, I'm sort of a fan of him. He urinated on my shoe. Like, I'm sort of a fan of him, sort of. I mean, he can be somewhat spine-tingly-dingly, but the way they did it, and I figured they would, the way they manipulated his voice as Ultron was, oh boy, was it nice. It was nice. And there were a couple of things that a couple of character arcs that I did appreciate, and like I said, those two things I didn't like really, but they didn't detract from the movie itself. If you are a comic book fan, or maybe you're curious about sex or filmmaking, whatever the case, if you're a comic book fan, if you saw the first Avengers, if you want to see this one, it's a must. You have to see it. You have to. And if ticket prices weren't so goddamn expensive, I would say see it at least twice, 3 times. You have to see this movie. If you're at all a fan or at all interested, you have to see this movie. If you really didn't care about the Avengers to begin with, what's the point of watching the second installment? But don't forget, wait for the end credits post scene. You have to wait for it. It is simple and it is awesome in all its manner. It is awesome. So wait for that first post-credit, end credit, the animations, not the animations, but the graphics that they show when they give you the main characters, their credits and shit. Wait for that. You don't have to wait for the whole thing. There's no shawarma in this one. There's no post-end credits scene. Just that first, after the initial end credits. After that, when you see the scene, which is, again, brilliant! After that, you can leave. But, again, if you have no interest in this at all, of course you're not going to want to see it. But if you have even the most remote intrigue, you have to see this movie. It is a must-see. If you just want to see a summer blockbuster or a pre-summer blockbuster to get you ready for the big movies like San Andreas or, hey, Ant-Man, they're finally going to do Ant-Man even though he was one of the original Avengers. Or, and there's no Wasp. I don't think. It might be. But who knows. Or, you know, Jurassic World. Before these phenomenal motion pictures, take a look at this one. This one is really something. And thank you all for watching. I have more for you soon to come. So stay tuned, take care, and have a great day.